My name is Ashwath Balakrishnan, and I work at the research team. I'm the division lead for DeFi. DeFi is a bit of a unique situation, I think. It's been in a rut for quite some time. It'll be 2 years since, I guess, like the macro top of DeFi in February. It's been the toughest period for this sector since DeFi Summit, which was in 2020. Most DeFi tokens, even highly regarded ones, down 70 to 90%, and these are coins that where the underlying protocols had actual usage. Market conditions are tough. New projects are pretty hesitant to launch new tokens. Lots of teams have abandoned their visions, either because they're moving to greener pastures or because they've just lost conviction in the space. I think in reality, a large percentage of DeFi projects that existed in 2020 were, in all honesty, grifters and low effort projects. So what we're left with now is people who actually see the path forward for decentralized finance and how it evolves into a mainstream phenomenon. A protocol called Gearbox. I think it takes the speculation angle inside DeFi much further. What Gearbox does is essentially lets you lever up with future style margining. Protocols like Compound and Aave, they employ something called over-collateralized margining, which basically means you have to put in more capital than you can take out as a loan. Gearbox basically created this primitive called a credit account, which is basically a smart contract wallet that has certain features built into it, certain authority by the Gearbox protocol, such as the ability to liquidate a position whose health factor has fallen below 1, basically falls into the liquidation threshold. And so, yeah, I think it's a really cool service that will serve as the backbone of DeFi over the next cycle. The impact was honestly minimal. If you look at, even Alameda 3AC, before they all blew up, they had to pay back the DeFi protocols in order to get their collateral back. And DeFi has pretty much proven over the course of, CeFi collapsing that there's a huge boon to just having that on-chain business and the transparency that being on-chain provides the entire ecosystem with like all of the stakeholders. And so I think DeFi mechanism-wise has held up really well. But it's difficult, I guess, to see that just because the tokens have suffered so much, usage and traction has suffered a bit. But at the end of the day, most of these protocols, especially the bigger ones, they all worked exactly as they were supposed to have. There's a lot we could potentially look to, given the state of DeFi, what it looked like when it was flourishing. I think the most obvious answer is liquidity and speculation-centric primitives, things that enable more efficient leverage, like Gearbox credit accounts, under-collateralized lending, decentralized derivatives, and more diverse lending models, perhaps, just more innovation on top of the over-collateralized lending model. Some more slightly esoteric ideas are probably improving the state of passive liquidity provision, expanding the stablecoin market in order to create Forex primitives, and maybe even more UX-friendly payment rails, even though payments are hardly an esoteric idea. Over the course of 2021 and 2022, I was insanely bullish on decentralized derivatives, specifically decentralized perpetuals, just because the opportunity was pretty clear, and as to why this seemed like the logical next step for DeFi. If you believe that DeFi will eventually converge towards the broader trends we see in other financial markets, it's difficult to see how decentralized derivatives don't become a much larger market than they are today. I think the problems are quite nuanced, and it only pretty recently dawned on me like what the actual issue was and why these primitives didn't get traction. If you think about it, like CeFi just had to mimic TradFi order books, right? They didn't have to do much in order to create these markets. And so they created very simple, well, I wouldn't say simple, but they created familiar infrastructure that people were used to. On the other hand, you have DeFi, which operates with several more constraints. And so like the apps that are built on the blockchain need to be compatible with the speed and the nature and the virtual machine of the underlying blockchain. And something that really changed the way that I look at the state of decentralized perps was when my colleague Duncan and I, we reevaluated decentralized derivatives, and we started looking at perpetuals in particular and the different designs in the market. And that's when we realized that there was actually a lot of pent-up demand to trade on-chain, futures and perps. It was just that there was a dearth of scalable and effective mechanism design that sort of inhibited that sector. While thinking about solutions, I think this overarches with another key thesis that I have, which is that we're going to see some degree of market making capital move from centralized exchanges to decentralized exchanges. But in order to facilitate that, we need on-chain products that these market makers are comfortable with. And what's the most familiar mode of price discovery and trading for market makers? Order books. And so we come full circle back from order books to AMMs to the Oracle model back to order books. While I think AMMs aren't going anywhere, I think there's a massive opportunity to build an actual order book DEX. Again, I think this ties back to the derivatives problem, because if you look at the decentralized perp market, DYDX was virtually the only on-chain derivatives platform with any degree of traction. And that's because it had a centralized exchange-like experience for the user. They had gasless trading, they had instant orders, and strong liquidity guarantees. DYDX had, and in its current state with V3, it has a cheat code, which is that it uses a centralized matching engine and a centralized order book. And so if we were to treat DYDX as a proxy for demand to trade on liquid on-chain perpetual contracts, then I think the scope of this opportunity becomes pretty evident. One of the key themes in the report for DeFi is that we think the blue chip protocols are going to make somewhat of a return. They're going to be resurrected. I think their growth cycles are going to start to kick into the next gear. And it's because, these protocols are led by teams that have seen an entire DeFi cycle from, its starting point to its peak and now to the throes. That kind of experience, and just given most of these teams are pretty well funded, I think they understand the direction the space needs to go in, and they've been heads down building towards this long-term vision. And they've been just taking the token prices tanking. They've been okay with, I guess, what the tokens have been doing, and they've been continuing to build towards whatever vision it is that they have, along with the fact that they're basically the leaders of their category. Uniswap, Aave, Compound protocols of this sort. The fact that they have the funding, they have the experience, makes me think that they're best suited to take advantage of the next cycle and build products that are going to take DeFi to the next level. Yearn's a bit of a unique case, I think, where I actually think they stand a chance. Yields in DeFi are sort of a consequence of appetite for leverage. When the market's doing what it's doing right now, there's no demand for leverage, and that's the only reason people borrow or lend, borrow on Aave or Compound. And so when borrowing is shrinking and yields are going down across the board, protocols like Yearn obviously suffer. But I think eventually, when we return to some degree of normal, Yearn will prove to be a useful product again, just because they let you do things on a cumulative, as a group, rather than you individually pulling off some kind of farming strategy. You basically pool your capital with a bunch of other people, and you get the benefits of automation. You get the benefits of gas savings from having one single transaction rebalance everyone's position. And so I think Yearn has the ability it has some degree of staying power as a sustainable product. Yeah, I'm a bit hesitant to put timelines on this stuff again. I'm pretty bullish on the innovation that's going to come out of DeFi over 2023. But I guess when it comes to token prices, I have maybe more of a neutral view. Probably hear a lot of this from Jason.
In this case for this year, it's mostly been down.
But the macro overhang right now is very concerning. And crypto sits at the tail end of the risk curve. So right now, restoring confidence in crypto requires restoring confidence in every other risk market that comes on the risk curve before crypto. Stocks seem to be doing well right now, but there's still a lot of uncertainty over economic conditions and monetary policy, and I think a lot of people are still wary about the effects that could have. We have internal factors like the fallout from the FTX collapse, and we have external factors like macro to worry about. If we can zoom out past the next 2 years and look at the next decade or so, I think you'd be hard pressed to find a situation in which I'm bearish. I think the end state is some kind of a compromise between UX and censorship resistance. Before you pull the pitchforks out, let me elaborate on what exactly I mean. I'm not talking about eliminating censorship resistance on the blockchain layer. So imagine there's like this Robinhood-esque app. It basically uses DeFi protocols as liquidity infrastructure to create its own financial product. So Robinhood plugs into the New York Stock Exchange. Instead, it's plugging into Uniswap. You want leverage, it's not its own margin lending desk, it's something like Compound. So that kind of user experience, I think, make it really simple for the average Joe to start experiencing DeFi. Now you have Gmail and Outlook, which are proprietary products. They're both built on top of open source protocols like IMAP and SMTP. And I believe this app will work in a similar way. Right? Gmail and Outlook can censor you in the same way that this app can also censor the things you do. But that's not necessarily the worst thing, especially given the target audience is the layman. It enables this platform to have some degree of risk control. They can limit risk by deciding what a user can interact with, what kind of actions they can take. But at the same time, if a user wants to directly interact with the infrastructure, they want to directly use Uniswap, they want to trade some shitcoin that this Robinhood-esque app isn't letting them, they have the ability to do that. And I think it's really important to acknowledge that there's this optionality to either use the centralized app that gives you a better user experience or to directly interact with these different protocols. Basically, we would have like individuals like us and potential platforms like this Robinhood app could both directly interact with financial infrastructure, which I think is a pretty huge difference from the way things work right now. And it's inevitable that we see centralized platforms built on top of DeFi. And I think that's strictly better than the current structure, which is centralized platforms with whitelisted access to centralized infrastructure. And the ideal state is probably, where a user comes in, they try to use this app to get to know DeFi and become familiar with the space. And as they start to understand, why decentralization matters and why self-custody matters, they start to, make advancements and basically wean themselves off of the centralized app and towards self-custody. And so the hope is, you eventually see this migration from centralized to decentralized solutions. And the centralized app acts as an onboarding mechanism of sorts rather than a permanent means of access. I think that's a pretty lofty idea, but that's what my ideal end state for DeFi would look like, where most of these apps that we think of today, Uniswap, Aave, they start to become and they start to be considered liquidity infrastructure rather than consumer-facing apps. I've spoken to a lot of people that have had this view, and I think it's an understandable stance. There have been some massive headwinds that have pushed DeFi back quite a bit, but I would argue that those headwinds were important and they were very valuable because they forced out a lot of the grifters and the copycats. If you think about the history of tech, pessimism by default is not a new stance when it comes to frontier technology. And so it's completely understandable that someone's a skeptic. If you take a step back and you try to understand the core vision and the objective, which is self-sovereignty and taking legitimate control of your assets, you also look at the history of finance and the dark side of that and how things have played out, how bad financial censorship has been. I think you'll understand why there are so many people who have this unbridled optimism about DeFi. And its success isn't guaranteed, but thankfully there are hundreds, maybe thousands of people who have this optimism, and they jumped headfirst into DeFi in an attempt to build the future of finance. I know this optimism could seem naive to a lot of people, but every successful product that changed the game of its respective industry was built by people who are considered naive optimists. Like the people building DeFi, they see what the future of the world looks like with individual financial sovereignty. And while the movement was hijacked by grifters along the way, the end goal is pretty noble. And the collapse of CeFi over the last 6 months, I think, has added further conviction to the notion that on-chain transparent financial infrastructure is important. FTX, BlockFi, Celsius, all insolvent, all bankrupt. Uniswap, Aave, all solvent, and they can never be insolvent by design. So, they could die, but they're never going to do sneaky things with user money. Not because, they're better people, but it's because they simply can't. They have no means of accessing user funds. So I guess I would say if you're able to ignore the big picture and be swayed by, the scammers and the grifters who are in this industry, I would consider that to be naive pessimism.